All right. Welcome, everyone, to our second week here of rules education with HSJGA. Last week, if you were not on the call with us, last week we discussed rules 1 through 4. So this week we're moving on to rules 5 and 6. I don't need to be showing myself there. My name is Ryan Toole. I'm the Director of Tournament Operations for the Hawaii State Junior Golf Association. And also on the line, who will be working in with me talking about the rules today is Mary B. Porter King, who is our HSJGA president. And she is also a USGA rules official who officiates at the US Open, the US Juniors, and many other USGA championships. So first of all, I want to thank Mary B for being here with us, and also thank you guys for joining in on the call tonight. And hopefully, you guys can learn a few things. The rules are a bit simpler in 2019, so it's great for you guys now that the rules are just a little bit easier to understand. But continue to study, continue to immerse yourself in the rules, and just try to learn as much as you can, because the more you know, the more it's going to be able to help you out. So,
I am here, Ryan. Thanks for including me, and I look forward to. I always look forward to learning. So every time I follow the rules, I learn something. So I hope everyone else does tonight too.
with that said, we'll get started here. So, again, today's subject, we're going to be focusing on playing the round and a hole. Starting on rule number 5. So, rule number 5, what it covers. Covers how to play around, essentially. A few things that are involved in that, where you can practice on the course, whether it's before a round or whether it's during a round, the starting and the ending of a round, what stipulates that, and also what happens when play has been stopped and has to resume, whether it's different things like weather or darkness, things like that. So also in rule 5, just a few things that players are expected of. They're expected to start each round on time, and also play continuously throughout their round with a good pace of play during each hole until they've completed the round. And what the USGA recommends in Rule 5 in terms of playing your round is that you take no more than 40 seconds to take a stroke. So that's from when the time you get to your ball when it's your turn to play. 40 seconds is that time that you have to make that stroke. That's their recommendation. Some committees may change that based on their individual pace of play policies and things like that. And we'll talk about that more as we go along. So rule 5.1 to start rule 5, it talks about a round. Definition of a round you guys see here. It's 18 or fewer holes played in the order set by the committee. So it doesn't have to be number 1 hole to number 18 hole. For shotgun, for instance, you may start on a different hole and end on a different hole rather than 1 and 18, but that can still be considered a round there. So when a round ends in a tie and play will go on to until a winner is determined, a tied match extended 1 hole at a time. So this is the continuation of the round that you played beforehand. It's the same round, it's not a new round. And if a playoff happens in stroke play, that is considered a new round. So just a little bit more about the definition of a round and how it kind of plays into the rules here. Rule 5.2, what it talks about is it talks about practicing on the course. And they give a definition or a loose definition of that. It means playing a ball or testing the surface of the putting green or any hole by rolling the ball or rubbing the surface. So that's what's considered practicing. Nothing else other than that. In match play, a player may practice on the course before or between rounds. A little bit different in stroke play. On the day of the stroke play competition, you're allowed to practice on the course after completing your round. However, you cannot practice on the course before the round, and that's specific to the course. Obviously, you're allowed to use the practice areas in any practice putting or chipping areas as well. So obviously that's allowed. And then any breach of the rule in terms of practice. So say you were to play a hole and then go back and play that hole over again. Essentially, that would be considered practice. The penalty for the breach of the rule for the first time would be a general penalty, which is 2 strokes. And then any second breach of the rule would be a disqualification. So no practicing on the course during stroke play. And then starting and ending a round, rule 5-3. Obviously, the player has to start the round at your starting time, and you have to be ready to play. This is a really big one that comes into play a lot with our events at HSJGA. Have to be ready to play at the starting time and at the starting point that is set by the committee. So typically that's stipulated by whatever hole you're going to start on. And what it means by when you're ready to play is that you have at least a club and a ball ready to go. You have your ammo loaded up and you're ready to fire. A lot goes into your starting time, and it's very specific that you pay attention to those times, because there's a lot in terms of whether you're there on time, and if you're not, what happens. So this goes into a few exceptions. If you're not there on time, typically it's a disqualification if you're not ready to go. But there are three exceptions. So if you arrive to the tee no more than 5 minutes late, so if your tee time is at 9 o'clock and you show up at 9:04 and 58 seconds, you're still good in that case, but you'll be applied the general penalty, and that'll be on your first hole. So added 2 strokes to your first hole, but you're still permitted to tee off. The second exception would be if you started no more than 5 minutes early. So if your tee time was at 9 a.m. and you went at 8:56, you would still be permitted to play your round, but you again would be assessed the general penalty on your first hole there. And then a third exception of waiving the disqualification would be if there's any exceptional circumstances that the committee decides you're all right. Maybe it's there's a backup on the first hole, and so everyone's starting times gets pushed back. That would be an instance where if you were 5 minutes behind or more, the committee would waive the penalty there.
So Ryan,
Really?
what if bad traffic? Is that a reason?
Yes. So that's what we call a call to the tee. Typically if someone's in traffic, they try to get that information out to you, and someone will send me a text, hey, I'm stuck in traffic. If it's one person, typically that's not a reason. If it's the only road that leads to the golf course and everyone's stuck, maybe an exception in that case. That might fall under the third exception there, but typically no, there would be no exception for if you were caught in traffic.
Right. And I just want to make a point on practice after play as well, because this is a new rule. But I think we have in our HSJGA rules that there is no practice after play and stroke play. Is that correct?
I believe so. Yes. So no practice after your round. But we're going to talk a little bit more about that. But you are permitted to practice putt if you really need to, as long as you're not delaying any groups behind you or anything like that. Right. So a little bit about making it to your tee time on time is a big thing, very important thing there. You don't want to start your day with 2 strokes right off the bat. And then a little bit about how the round ends. We talked a little about how you begin. A round ends in match play when the result is decided. Rule 3, what we talked about last week, talks a little bit more about match play and when it's decided. And then in stroke play, when you hole out on your final hole, that means your round ends. So there are stipulations in the rules that say when your round starts and when your round ends. So it's not just something that you can arbitrarily determine. Playing in groups. Rule 5-4 talks about that. In match play, during a round, the player and opponent, you have to play in the same group. And then in stroke play, you're to play in the group you're assigned to by the committee, And the only instances where you would change groups or anything like that would be if the committee approves the change. So pretty simple stuff there. But as you can see, it does mention in the rules that you are to play with a specific group. So that is, in there. Any penalty for this? So if you chose to, you're playing a match against someone else and you decide, you know what, I just don't want to play with them anymore, and you move on, go play by yourself, that would be a disqualification. So any breach of rule.
It'd be a problem if they went off to play by themselves, because they wouldn't have a marker to keep the score, would they?
Exactly. Yeah. So obviously a lot of issues there. Even if, in an instance where you're playing a little bit slower than the group, and you and a fellow playing partner in that group say, hey, you know what, Sally and I will move back so that you guys can go and play faster ahead of us. If the committee stipulated that you're in that group, you have to stay in that group. So even if someone in your group is holding you up, you're not permitted to move on unless you're approved by the committee. So here's a little bit about practicing during the round. So while playing a hole, it stipulates that a player must not take a practice stroke at any ball or on or off the course. So that, if you're in the middle of a hole and you see a ball in the middle of the fairway, typically you wouldn't want to hit that ball. There are a few exceptions in that case, things that aren't considered a stroke. So if you're taking a practice swing if you're taking a practice swing with no intent to actually strike the ball, so just taking a practice swing next to the ball, hitting a ball back to a practice area, or strokes made in playing out a hole whose result has been decided. So if you've had already lost the hole, or you conceded the hole and you decide that you just want to continue to play and finish the hole, that wouldn't be considered practice in this instance. So few instances where you can still do things that may look like practice, but wouldn't technically be considered a stroke or a practice stroke in those instances. So, for instance, if there's a range ball on your fairway that you're playing, and you decide, I think it's better for the players behind me if I knock this back into the range, and you just kind of tap it back to the range, totally fine there. And then between two holes, a player must not make a practice stroke. And again, we're looking at the definition of a stroke there. Any exception in that case would be you're allowed to practice putting or chipping under the rules, and that's on the putting green that you just completed. So you couldn't go on another hole and practice a putt on that green. You're also permitted to obviously make a practice stroke in the teeing area of the next hole. You're not permitted to make any strokes in bunkers, especially if you're delaying play in that case. So between holes, a player must not make a practice stroke. And then while play is suspended or otherwise stopped, a player must not make a practice stroke. So another instance where you're not allowed to make a practice stroke, except if you're allowed under the previous instances that we talked about. Anywhere, you're not allowed to make a practice stroke anywhere outside. You're allowed to make them anywhere outside the course. So if you've left the grounds for the day, and then anywhere that the committee allows you or the course allows you on the course. So those are instances where if play has been suspended or otherwise stopped, where you're allowed to make a practice stroke. So any penalty for practice strokes that were made that weren't allowed, that would be a 2-stroke penalty. And then if the breach occurs between holes, the penalty is applied on the next hole. Rule 5-6, everyone's favorite. One of the biggest aspects to competitive golf is pace of play, playing your round in a good manner. It stipulates in the rules that the player must not unreasonably delay play, either when playing a hole or between two holes. There are a few exceptions in those cases. Getting a ruling from a rules referee, or if you got sick for whatever reason on a hole or things like that, always bring those things up to the committee. Any instance where you don't think that you're being slow and you're being accused of being slow, always a good idea to talk with a committee member or rules official and get it sorted out. So USGA provides a little bit of a video. Any penalty, any breach of that, unreasonably delaying play. These are the penalties that the USGA has in their rule book, obviously. First breach would be 1 stroke penalty. The second breach would be a general penalty, 2 strokes, and then a third breach would be disqualification. But they also allow committees to stipulate their own pace of play for a specific event, which is what we do for HSJGA. Just a little bit. Here's their video that just talks a little bit about unreasonably delayed play, things like that.
It is important that you are aware of how your pace of play impacts others. The 2019 rules encourage prompt pace of play by all players by recommending that you play promptly throughout the round, such as by preparing in advance for each stroke, moving at a good pace between strokes and between holes, and that you make a stroke in no more than 40 seconds. The 2019 rules also expressly allow for you to agree to play out of turn in a safe and responsible way to save time or for convenience. This is often referred to as ready golf. To learn more, please visit usga.com.
So a few important things that it talked about there. We're going to get into those on the next slide. But just to kind of reference you guys on the instances where a committee would make a specific pace of play policy. And this is a very common policy that you'll see. Not only, obviously, we do it for our events, but many other golf organizations use a checkpoint policy. USGA uses it for their events, and many other associations across the country and the world. They all use it for their events, but essentially what it is, we use a 4 checkpoint system. You're allotted a certain amount of time to play, certain amount of holes before you reach a checkpoint. And a group must finish those holes in the allotted time, or they have to finish the holes within 14 minutes behind the group in front of them. So those are our stipulations for our tournaments. We have people on holes 4, 9, 13, and 18 are gracious volunteers out there helping us. I'm sure many of you participants, members, have come across our policies before, but our penalties or our red cards are a little bit different than what the penalties are in the rule book. Just that our third offense is a 2-stroke penalty, and our second offense is a 1-stroke penalty versus it going right to a 1-stroke penalty. So if you miss a checkpoint for your first checkpoint through, you get a warning card. If you end up getting 2 cards, you're liable. Anybody in the group is liable to a 1-stroke penalty, not necessarily just a slower player or one person. Third missed checkpoint, you're liable for a 2-stroke penalty, and then if you miss all 4 checkpoints, chances of you continuing to play or being disqualified from the event are pretty high. So not too often people get 4 missed checkpoints because they realize in the first or second one that they need to play a little bit faster there. So that's our policy. That's what we do at HSJGA. You guys should all be familiar with that. We do it at every tournament. So very important stuff there.
So Ryan, what can I do as a player when I'm playing with someone that's really slow? What should I do? Should I just run, or should I tell somebody? What should I do? What are my responsibilities?
That is to continue to play, as you are, but the earliest chance you get, you should try to notify a rules official. Get a volunteer to notify a rules official, because the thing that you want to do is you want to make other people aware of what's causing the group to be slow. So you don't necessarily need to point fingers, but you just you could request somebody watch the group. The biggest thing is that when we're trying to figure out the issues with a group, typically we want to find out if someone's playing slow, but it also could be just a combination of everyone not really playing ready golf or things like that. So your best bet, find somebody that can watch the group and figure out really what the issue is. But don't just sit there and stop playing and wait for someone to come up to you. So always continue to play. The next little section of Rule 5 talks about stopping and resuming play. Like I said, you must not stop play except in these cases. If the committee would suspend play for whatever reason, if you think that there's danger in the area, such as lightning, for instance, you should report that to the committee. It's not a judgment call on your own. You can't just stop your play and say, well, I stopped because of lightning. You should report that to the committee, and typically they'll approve that. And then in match play, if you or your opponent can agree to stop play for any reason, except if it delays the competition. So those are a few instances where you're allowed to stop play. But if you stop play for any reason that's not allowed, any of those exceptions up there, you are disqualified. So a few instances where a committee would suspend play, and this is what these are things that players should do when the committee does suspend play. And this is 2 different instances. There's an immediate suspension, which would be for an instance where there's danger in the area. Typically that would be lightning, or say a tornado or something like that. And then there's normal suspensions such as darkness or unplayable course. Not necessarily something that needs people off the course immediately, but they do require different things from the players. So if it's an immediate stoppage, if you're required to stop right away, you're not allowed to take any strokes until the committee resumes play. So essentially, if you've hit your drive, you're not allowed to go out and finish the hole. You have to stop. However, if it's a normal suspension, if it's just getting dark and the round hasn't ended yet, if all players in your group are between 2 holes, you have to stop. It must not make a stroke to begin another hole until you resume play. But if you've started a hole, you're permitted to finish that hole, and you don't have to get your entire group to finish it. But if you finish the hole, if you started the hole, you're permitted to finish it as long as it was a normal suspension of play. So a few different key differences between those 2 there. So any penalties for those not following the procedures and the specific suspensions there, it would be disqualification. So just make sure you're aware. Typically it's noted by the sound of the air horn that the committee blows. We don't do it too much in our events because we don't deal with lightning, oddly enough, out here. But we have had instances where we've had a normal suspension of play due to darkness and things like that. So important to know the differences there. You would hate to be disqualified for continuing to play when there was an immediate suspension. So and then once the committee decides to resume play, you have to resume when they on the time that they set, and then from where you stopped play on the hole, or if you were between holes, you go to the next teeing area. And if you don't play from where you stopped, the penalty for that breach would be a disqualification again. So pretty self-explanatory stuff there, but very important to know the procedures in those instances, especially if it's if you go to the mainland and play in a tournament there. It could happen more often because they have a little bit more unpredictable lightning out there. So just be aware of Rule 5.7 there. And then another key aspect to this is what to do with your ball when this happens. So when you stop play of a hole, you can mark and you can lift your ball either before or when play is resumed. You must replace the ball that you used. You can use the original ball or you can use another ball, and you should replace it on that spot. And if it's not known, you can estimate the spot. So say, for instance, you marked it and the mark might have come out of the ground and blew, a few yards away. If you can kind of estimate where it was, totally fine. Then that instance doesn't have to be an exact spot. If you didn't lift your ball when play was stopped, which again is okay, you may play the ball as it lies, or you may mark it and lift it and replace it with that ball or with the another ball. So, and then if any of this was done incorrectly and you placed your ball in an incorrect spot, a wrong place, that would be considered a breach, and you would receive the general penalty, which would be 2 strokes. Essentially, you played from a wrong place in that instance. All right, so that's Rule 5. Talks a little bit about the ongoings during your round on the course, and then Rule 6, what it talks about specifically is playing of a hole. So what it states is a player has started a hole when he or she makes a stroke to begin the hole. So pretty obvious there, but if you look up, the definition, the key word there is makes a stroke. So looking up the definition of a stroke, that has to be made in order for the hole to start. So things like, practice strokes or things like that wouldn't be considered starting the hole.
So if I hit the ball with my practice swing, have I started the hole?
Technically, no, because you didn't. It wasn't a stroke made with intent. Sometimes people can accidentally hit the ball off the tee when they're making their practice stroke. But as long as it was a practice stroke, then it's okay.
But I didn't mean, I just took a swing on the tee and hit my ball or hit the ground, and the ball fell off the tee. Am I okay?
You are okay. Yeah.
Right.
I think that's coming up here. Yeah. So Rule 6.1 stipulates, obviously, a ball must be played from inside the teeing area. And in an instance where, a ball was not played from inside the teeing area, we talked a little bit about the teeing area last week. We'll talk a little bit about more right here. Sorry. Few penalties there in stroke play, but in match play, there is no penalty. And your opponent has the option of making you replay that stroke, or they can just continue on with play. So it's up to your opponent in that instance, whether they want you to replay the stroke and cancel the one that you made from outside the teeing area. However, in stroke play, if you play from outside of a teeing area, you get the general penalty, and you have to correct the mistake by playing a ball from inside the correct teeing area. So, and that's before you either tee off on the next hole, or if it's on your last hole of the round, before you turn in your scorecard. So what does it mean to be inside the teeing area? Well, we're going to talk about that a little bit. So your ball is considered in the teeing area when any part of the ball touches or is above any part of the teeing area. This is a great little diagram directly from the rules book here. They give 6 different examples of a ball that may or may not be within the teeing area. And as you can see, the 2 tee markers define the front of the teeing area, and then it's 2 club lengths on the way back. And that's your size of your teeing area. So any if your ball touches any part of that area, it's considered in the teeing area. So you're allowed to stand outside of the teeing area and when you're making a stroke, and you may play a ball either from a tee, teed up in the teeing area, or if you want to play from the ground, totally fine there too. So this is a great little diagram. You can see obviously these 3 golf balls are completely outside the teeing area, and then these 3 golf balls while some of them may be slightly outside the teeing area, as long as they're touching the teeing area, they're good in that instance. So you can play your ball all the way on the left-hand side of the tee marker and stand outside the teeing area. As long as the ball's in the teeing area, you're fine there. And again, like I said, you can play from a tee in the ground or from the ground itself. And then a few things you're allowed to do in the teeing area in terms of improving conditions. You're allowed to alter the surface of the ground in the teeing area. So a lot of the times you'll see people kind of just push their foot down behind a teed up ball. That's totally fine. You can move, bend, or break grass, weeds, or other natural objects. The key word there is natural objects that are attached or growing in the ground in the teeing area. So if you wanted to pick up some grass and throw it in the air to see where the wind's going, totally fine there. You're permitted to remove or press down sand and soil in the teeing area, and you're also allowed to remove dew, frost, and water in the teeing area. Now, the reason they stipulate these things in this section, talking about the teeing area, is because you're not necessarily allowed to remove or improve the conditions of your area in other parts of the golf course. So again, it's important to note that you need to know where your golf ball is, like we talked about last week, and what you're allowed to do in those areas. So if there's an instance where you do an action that improves the conditions affecting your stroke, that would be considered a breach in this case, and you would receive the general penalty. And those breaches, they fall under Rule 8.1a. This one there. And then another thing that you're not permitted to do inside the teeing area, you're not permitted to move the tee markers set by the committee in order to improve the conditions affecting your stroke. So if you have a specific line you want to hit your golf ball on, and for whatever reason the tee marker is in your way, you're not permitted to move the marker to the side or anything like that, just so you can hit that line a little bit better. And then just like we were kind of talking about there earlier, I think this covers your question, Mary B. Whether a ball is not in play until a stroke is made. So that's a key thing to note about the teeing area. So the ball can be lifted or moved without penalty before the stroke is made. And then if you tee your ball up and if the ball falls off the tee, or if it's knocked off the tee by you before you have the chance to make a stroke at it, you can re-tee it anywhere in the teeing area without penalty. But if you make a stroke at the ball while it's falling or after it has fallen off, there is no penalty, but the stroke counts. So that's important to note as well. So if mid-swing, the ball's falling off the tee and you somehow, with good hand-eye coordination, hit it there, no penalty in that instance, but you have to play the ball wherever it lies next. So a few key things to note there. If you're having trouble, if your hand's not very steady that day, if you're nervous on the first tee and you just can't get the ball to stay on the tee there, it's okay. No penalties there. Just got to make sure you're not making any strokes at it. And then if the player's ball in play is in the teeing area after a stroke, so say for whatever reason, you tried to drive the ball and it somehow went 3 inches backwards, you're permitted to lift or move the ball without penalty. And you can play that ball or another ball, and you can tee it up, or you can play it from the ground. So if you hit a ball and it remains in that teeing area, you're permitted to pick it up and tee it up again, or you can hit it from the ground. Up to you.
That's a whole new rule, Ryan, which they just put into effect last year. So for those new players, that if they did happen to take a swing at it and whiffed it, or it fell off the tee, or even whiffed it, they can still move it within the teeing area. So once they're in the teeing area, they still have those privileges. So I think it's a great new rule that they put into effect. So
yeah, definitely makes more sense. That's one of the instances where you know, they're trying to just have the rules make more sense, and definitely in that instance, it really does, because that's the worst. If if you whip the ball with your driver, and then, in the past you weren't allowed to essentially you couldn't hit the driver again if you couldn't tee it up, but now you're permitted to tee it up again, so you have a better chance of getting that distance down. The next aspect of Rule 6 talks a little bit about the ball that you're using in the play of a hole. A player has to hole out with the same ball played from the teeing area, except if the ball is lost or comes to rest out of bounds, or if you substitute another ball in, and that's whether or not it was allowed. Some rules, they obviously allow you to substitute another ball. And then in the instance where you weren't allowed to substitute it and you did, you would just receive a penalty in that instance. So always have to hole out with the same ball that you started with in the teeing area, except for those two exceptions there. So in an instance where you're substituting another ball while playing a hole, this would be like if you're taking relief by dropping or placing. You may either use the original ball or another ball. If you're playing again from where the previous stroke was made, so if you hit it out of bounds and you're taking your stroke and distance penalty, you can use the original ball if you found it out of bounds, or you can use another ball. Totally up to you in that instance. And then when you're replacing a ball on a spot, you're not allowed to substitute a ball and must use the original ball. And there are certain exceptions that fall under Rule 14, and obviously we'll talk about that when we get there. But in a lot of instances, you are allowed to, use another ball. But when you're replacing a ball on a spot, you're not allowed to substitute a ball. So that's an important thing to note there.
So this is another, I think, a great change, Ryan. Used to be the only time you could substitute a ball was when you were under penalty relief. And now when you are taking relief from sprinkler heads and different objects on the golf course, you may substitute the ball, which is nice. And like you said, in replacing the ball, and that may be that somebody asks you to lift your ball because it interferes with them, remember that you cannot replace that ball. So, and just like you're on the putting green, you're lifting, you're going to replace it, then you may not substitute a ball. So, but I think it's a great rule now with any time you're taking a relief procedure, whether under penalty or not, you're allowed to substitute.
Yeah, and that's like she said, like Mary B said, that's the biggest difference in terms of when you're allowed to do it and not, whether you're taking penalty relief or
or just free relief or penalty relief. So it's
right.
I think it's a great rule because it was always very confusing.
Mm-hmm. And then if for whatever reason you incorrectly substituted the ball, if you did it in that instance where you were asked to pick up your ball because it was in someone's way and you accidentally put another ball down, unfortunately you'd receive the general penalty there. And then in stroke play, you must then play out the hole with the incorrectly substituted ball. So that's an important aspect of that rule as well. Just to note, you wouldn't correct your mistake in that instance. And then something that you see a lot, this is one of the most frequent outside the normal rules, rulings that I give, is hitting a wrong ball. That would be any other ball besides the ball you started with on the hole. The penalty for hitting a wrong ball is the general penalty, which is 2 strokes. In the instance where you did it in match play, if you and your opponent play each other's ball during the play of a hole, the first to make a stroke at a wrong ball, they get the general penalty, which is loss of hole in match play. If it is not known which wrong ball was played first, there is no penalty in the hole, just must be played out with the balls exchanged. So essentially you just continue on in that instance if it's not known. And then in stroke play, a little different in stroke play, still get the general penalty, 2 strokes in that instance. You must go back and correct your mistake by continuing play with the original ball. and playing that ball as it lies, or if you were not in the general area, say you were in a penalty area or went out of bounds, you can play it by taking relief under the rules as well. So any strokes that were made with a wrong ball, those strokes don't count, as long as they were before you corrected the mistake. So, and then if you do not correct the mistake before going and making a stroke on the next hole, that would be the instance where you would be disqualified. And that goes the same with if you do not correct the mistake before turning in your scorecard if you're on your final hole of the round. Big thing there, always got to go back and correct your mistake in that instance before you tee off on the next hole. And a great way to prevent this is to make an identifying mark on your golf ball. That's not just a course logo or a number, things like that. Something that you write or Sharpie onto your ball that allows you to, without even having to, touch the golf ball, allows you to tell that it's yours. Sometimes people like to put a small mark on there that requires you to, really search your golf ball. I like to put something big on there, so as soon as I look down on my golf ball, I know, oh, that's my ball. So
That's one of the rules, Ryan, that I think you make that mistake once, and I think you learn that you start putting a lot of marks on your ball so you can easily identify it. You really should, like Ryan just said, you shouldn't have to pick it up. You're allowed to as long as you mark it, but you really shouldn't have to. You should be able to easily identify your golf ball if you mark it properly. Have some fun with marking. Make your ball, easily identifiable as yours, and that way you won't have the situation of taking a penalty for playing a wrong ball.
Yeah, and sometimes I've come across the instance where you've hit a ball into an area that collects a lot of balls, and you never mark your ball, but you're almost pretty sure that it's your ball because it's a Titleist 3. I play Titleist 3s, but there's no mark on the ball. How could you really tell that it's your ball if there's no mark on the ball? So always important.
You're not going to be able to tell it's your ball, and it's going to be a lost ball. So like you said, there's a lot of Titleist 3s on the golf course, so make sure you mark it.
Very important. And then another section of Rule 6 talks a little bit about order of play. You guys know this stuff in terms of etiquette on the golf course, but they've now added it into the rules to stipulate who goes first. In match play, the honor is decided by a draw. So if the committee has stipulated the pairings, they're going to stipulate who goes first. If there's no draw in that instance, there's just an agreement, or you could just use a random method. Maybe it's tossing a tee or tossing a coin. And then very similar in, after you finish the first hole, all the other holes are determined by who won the previous hole. And then if the previous hole was tied, whoever had the honor on that hole will continue until someone else wins a hole next. So, and then very similar, after both players start a hole, the ball that is furthest from the hole is to be played first. In all cases, if you play when it's your opponent's turn to play, and this is in match play, obviously, there's no penalty, and you play your ball as it lies, but your opponent can and most likely will make you cancel the stroke unless it was a bad shot. So they have the ultimate power in that instance. So be sure if you're playing match play, you're paying a little bit more attention to whose turn it is to play, because it comes into play a little bit more than it would necessarily in stroke play, because in stroke play, obviously we'll get to that in a bit. So sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself there. Any exception in match play, playing out of turn, and that's if you guys agree on it. So if you're, for whatever reason, you want to save some time, if you both agree that it's okay for your opponent to play out of turn, then they may do so. Then in stroke play, again, the honor is decided either by a draw. So if the committee has put out pairings, typically whoever is listed first tees off first. Or by agreement, you guys can just agree who's going to go first, or by a random method. And then all other holes, whoever starts on those holes, they're determined obviously by the lowest gross score on the previous hole. That person has the honor of the next teeing area. And then if there's more than 2 people in a group, the player with the next lowest gross score would go next. You guys know that. And then if two or more players have the same score at the hole, they should play in the same order as the previous team. So whoever had honors on the previous hole, they'll continue those. And then after all players start a hole, the order of play is determined by whoever's furthest away. And then in all cases, there's no penalty if you play out of turn, except that if you and another player agree to play out of turn to give one of you an advantage, you would both get the 2-stroke general penalty there. So that goes along with playing ready golf. Obviously, that's a new term in the rules of golf, which is, in my opinion, is great because it improves everyone's pace of play. And really, ready golf is just, if you're ready to play, pretty much like that, then go ahead. In stroke play, you're both allowed and encouraged to play out of turn, as long as it's safe and you're being responsible about it. A few instances would be if you agree with another player to do so just to save time, or if it's more convenient for you guys. If you hit a great shot, your ball is right next to the hole, and you just want to hole out and finish up, totally fine to play out of turn in that instance. And then if you are ready and able to play before another player whose turn it is to play, if you're ready to play before someone else, and as long as it's not, putting anyone else in danger or gonna, distract or interfere with anybody else's play, then that's totally fine. So it's encouraged to play ready golf, especially if your group is behind. If you've received, one of those red cards already, great chance, great opportunity to play ready golf, and you're now allowed to under the rules of golf, which is nice. And I think this is huge for junior golfers as well, because a lot of the time we get wrapped up in the pressure of every shot, and we are so in tune with our pre-shot routines and things like that. So if you're playing with someone who maybe takes a little bit longer to get set up or hit a shot, and that, maybe you take that opportunity to play ready golf, and that allows your group to stay on pace, maybe. So great tool there. And then the final aspect of Rule 6 is talking about completing the play of a hole. Again, pretty simple stuff here. You guys can probably think about what stipulates the completion of a hole in match play. The player holes out, or the player's next stroke is conceded. And then the result of the hole is decided. The opponent's so these would be instances where in match play your hole is completed. The result of the hole is decided, such as when the opponent concedes the hole, the opponent's score for the hole is lower than the player possibly could make, or the player or opponent gets the general penalty, which is in match play loss of hole. Those would be instances where obviously the hole is done. And then in stroke play, everyone, like we talked about before, is required to hole out. So once you hole out, that's when your hole is completed in stroke play there. And that is it. Mary B, do you have any other comments? Anything you'd like to?
No, Ryan, I think good job. I think hopefully everyone learned something tonight, and I think you really hit home with pace of play, which is becoming more and more important to the game with the USGA and with all the governing bodies, the PGA and the LPGA. They're all really stressing pace of play these days. So I think it's really important we start now. And I'm going to tell you, for someone who's played golf since I was 7, sometimes the faster you play and the less you think about it, the better you play. So I don't think we need to spend all this time preparing for shots. And as Ryan also hit home, is that, like you said, if someone you're playing with is slow, go ahead and just let them know. I'll go ahead and hit. So that way we'll all play faster and have a lot more time to go do fun things.
Mhm. Yeah, no one wants to spend 5 hours on the golf course. That's
I
for
know
sure.
I don't.
Well, I want to thank you guys for attending tonight. Be on the lookout for another email regarding next week. I believe we will have the rules on Wednesday. We may also have another webinar for you guys next week, so be on the lookout for that. And just thanks again for joining us tonight. Hopefully everyone has a safe and fun end to their week. Hopefully you guys are all hanging in there. We're thinking about you, and we can't wait to see you guys all back at our tournaments in a few months. So thanks, guys.
Take care. Have a good evening.
10 attendees.
10. Not too many. You signing out?
Yeah. Did I just click exit?